welcome to our deep dive
Yeah.
into this mystery that has fascinated, I think, all of us at one point or another, UFOs. And I know you're here because you are looking for answers. And honestly, so am I. We're going to be looking at a curated collection of sightings. These aren't just any old reports.
Yeah.
We're talking about sightings corroborated by credible sources, military personnel, pilots, sometimes even backed up by official documentation.
Right.
So, for decades, the narrative around this has been, one of skepticism, dismissal. But what's interesting here is we're looking at cases where you have trained observers, people who know what they're looking at, people who are used to identifying objects in the sky. Their accounts are detailed, they're consistent, and it really does challenge, I think, those easy explanations that we've so often heard.
All right, let's unpack this. So let's start with this history of dismissal. We've all heard it: weather balloons, swamp gas, misidentified aircraft. But does that really account for everything? Well, you have projects like Project Blue Book, which was launched by the Air Force in the 50s to investigate these reports. Now, on the surface, that seems like a genuine attempt to understand the phenomenon. But when you dig a little deeper, a lot of researchers have argued that the conclusions were often rushed, sometimes even dismissive, despite encountering cases that they just couldn't explain.
So we have this official skepticism on the one hand, but then we also have these really detailed eyewitness accounts from people who should know what they're seeing.
Exactly. And that's where I think the tension lies. Let's go back, rewind the clock back to 1948, right here in the U.S. You have multiple airplane crews, including a military crew flying over New Mexico, and they report seeing these bright green fireballs streaking across the sky. They describe them as being unlike anything they'd ever seen before, moving at incredible speeds.
If I'm a pilot, I feel like I know what's up in the sky. When you hear trained professionals describing these objects as completely out of the ordinary, it makes you think.
Absolutely. And then you jump ahead a few years later to 1951, the Lubbock Lights case in Texas. A group of professors from Texas Tech witnessed a formation of lights moving silently across the night sky. They even took photographs. Some tried to explain them away as reflections, but even the head of the biology department at Texas Tech, a scientist, refuted that theory.
So it's interesting. It's not just lights. We're talking shapes, formations, objects that are doing things just seem impossible for conventional aircraft.
Right. And that diversity of reports, I think from simple lights to structured formations, from slow-moving objects to those exhibiting incredible speed and maneuverability, really does point to something beyond just misidentified planes or weather phenomena.
Let's fast forward a bit to 1981, to the Trans-en-Provence case in France. This is considered one of the most thoroughly documented UFO sightings in history.
And it is because you had a farmer who witnessed an object landing in his field. Investigators arrived. They found burn marks, scorched vegetation, ground compression that was consistent with an object weighing several tons.
So it wasn't just eyewitness testimony. You have actual physical traces of something unexplained. And the French Space Agency investigated. They couldn't definitively identify the object. They ruled out all the conventional explanations, and that says a lot.
Absolutely. And the scientific community took note. This was hard evidence to dismiss. And what's fascinating is that as more of these reports emerge, you start to see a pattern forming, a pattern of official denial and a lack of transparency surrounding these events.
Yeah, like the 1952 Washington, D.C. sightings. Multiple objects appearing over our nation's capital. Some reports even had them hovering over the White House. It must have been a shock to the Truman administration.
Well, they were shaken up enough to actually convene a panel of scientists. This was the Robertson panel. And they were brought in to try to downplay the event and to prevent mass panic.
So instead of a genuine investigation, it seems like there was a deliberate effort to control the narrative. I mean, what does that tell you?
It definitely raises questions about what information may be missing from the official narrative. And I think that sometimes the government's response in these cases can be even more intriguing than the sightings themselves.
And it's not just the 50s, right? You have the 2006 O'Hare International Airport sighting where you have multiple witnesses. You're talking airline employees, pilots, even passengers who saw a metallic disc hovering over the airport.
And despite all of that, despite the number of people who saw it, the FAA refused to investigate. They said it was weather. But a lot of people who were there that day contest that explanation.
So it almost feels like there's a playbook, right? UFO sighting occurs, there's public interest, and then, boom, official channels step in to downplay or dismiss the event.
Yeah, let's not forget about the alleged threats that were made to witnesses. I mean, you have the 1966 Westall UFO encounter in Australia. Hundreds of students and teachers witnessed this object descend into a nearby field. Many of them reported being intimidated, warned to stay silent about what they saw.
Imagine seeing something extraordinary, something that could potentially change our understanding of the world, and then being told to just keep quiet about it. That's scary. I mean, where does that leave us?
It definitely leaves us with more questions than answers. And we've looked at just a handful of cases, but this represents just a small fraction of the unexplained sightings that have been reported over the years.
So what can we really make of all of this? We have these credible witnesses, we have in some cases physical evidence, and this recurring pattern of government secrecy. It seems like there's a lot more to this story than we've been told.
You're right. And that's where things get really interesting. Because when you start to connect those dots, you can see a bigger picture emerging. A picture that challenges our conventional narrative. And it really forces us to confront the possibility that we may not be alone in the universe.
Hang on to that thought, because in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to be exploring some of the most compelling evidence that suggests exactly that. We're going to be looking at cases that have baffled scientists. We'll be analyzing some declassified documents and hearing from those who have encountered these phenomena firsthand.
And we'll also examine the psychological and societal impacts of these encounters. And we'll ask some tough questions about why this topic has been shrouded in so much secrecy for so long.
It's going to be a fascinating journey, and I hope you'll join us for the next leg of our exploration.
Welcome back to our deep dive. You know, before the break, we were really laying out this compelling case for the reality of UFOs. We explored cases with credible witnesses, tangible evidence, but I think it's important to remember the human element here, behind every sighting. There's a person, someone who has experienced something truly extraordinary.
Yeah, and let's face it, coming forward with a UFO's sighting can be tough. You open yourself up to skepticism, ridicule, disbelief from friends, family, colleagues. You've got to be pretty brave to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's so striking is the consistency and the sincerity that you find in so many of these accounts. You have people from all walks of life, pilots, astronauts, teachers, police officers, describing similar objects, similar maneuvers, often decades apart, with incredible detail and conviction.
Like the farmer in that French case that we discussed, that Trens-en-Provence case. He wasn't seeking fame or fortune, he was just reporting what he saw. A strange object landing in his field, and he stuck to his story, even in the face of intense scrutiny.
Right. And then you have the account of George Gorman, a pilot who actually had a dogfight, a real aerial chase with a UFO back in 1948. And this wasn't just some fleeting glimpse. Gorman, who is a National Guard pilot, pursued this object for over 20 minutes, describing its movements as unlike anything he had ever encountered.
Okay, so imagine being in a dogfight with something that you can't explain. I mean, I'd be telling that story for the rest of my life. And then think about the pressures those pilots who filmed the Pentagon videos must have felt.
Oh, absolutely. You have these Navy pilots, trained observers, equipped with advanced technology, capturing these unidentified objects on film. It's hard to argue with that kind of evidence. And, they were probably hesitant to come forward knowing the stigma attached to these sightings. But the footage really does speak for itself.
And, we can't forget Frederick Valentich, the pilot who disappeared in 1978. His final words, captured over the radio, were, "It is an aircraft, it's hovering, and it's not an aircraft." And then silence.
Yeah.
Just gone. I mean, that's chilling.
Right. And Valentich's disappearance is just one of many cases where you have these UFO sightings coinciding with unusual events, whether it's disappearances or electronic malfunctions, even these physical traces that are left behind. And I think the sheer variety of these accompanying phenomena really suggests that we're dealing with something far more complex than just lights in the sky.
So let's shift gears for a second and talk about that complexity. We've been focused a lot on these eyewitness accounts, but there is this growing body of evidence that goes beyond just personal testimony.
Right. We're talking about declassified documents, leaked videos, even admissions from government officials themselves. For decades, the official stance was denial and secrecy, but that wall of silence, I think, is finally starting to crumble.
Yeah, that 2017 New York Times article about the Pentagon's secret UFO program, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, that was a game changer. It was like they were finally admitting, okay, there's something here we can't explain.
Right. And let's not forget the release of those Pentagon videos that we talked about earlier. The fact that the Department of Defense officially acknowledged the authenticity of those videos. Videos showing objects performing maneuvers that are beyond our current understanding of physics. That's unprecedented.
Yeah, it does feel like they're finally admitting, okay, there's something here, something we can't explain.
And what's really interesting is that this shift in official acknowledgement coincides with a growing awareness among the public. More and more people are coming forward with their own sightings. And there's this growing demand for transparency from those in power.
It really makes you wonder what else might be out there, hidden away in government archives or classified reports. What information is missing from the public narrative?
Right, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If they've been downplaying or suppressing evidence for decades, what does that mean for our understanding of our place in the universe?
Okay, so I have to bring up one case that I find particularly chilling, that 2010 incident at Warren Air Force Base. We're talking nuclear missiles, the ultimate weapons, and reports of a massive cigar-shaped object hovering over the base.
Right, and they lost control of the missiles during that same time period. Now, coincidence? Maybe. But some of the reports suggest that the base actually received transmissions from the object, warnings. Now we have to approach those kinds of claims with, a healthy dose of skepticism. But the fact that something unusual happened at that base involving our nuclear arsenal, it's incredibly unsettling.
Yeah, it raises the stakes considerably. Are we talking about a potential threat here? Or are we just dealing with something so far beyond our comprehension that we just perceive it as threatening?
Right, and I think that's really the heart of the mystery, isn't it? The unknown. It can be both alluring and terrifying. And as we kind of delve deeper into this phenomenon, we're confronted with the very real possibility that our reality is far more complex and strange than we ever imagined.
So we've explored government suppression, compelling eyewitness accounts, and evidence that suggests, our technology may be far surpassed by something else out there. But where does that leave us? What are your final thoughts as we head into the final part of our deep dive?
I think what strikes me most is that despite decades of skepticism and denial, the evidence for the reality of UFOs continues to mount. We're not talking about blurry photos or unsubstantiated claims. We're talking about credible witnesses, scientific data, even admissions from government agencies.
So are we on the verge of this paradigm shift? Are we finally ready to acknowledge that we may not be alone in the universe?
We'll explore that very question as we continue our deep dive. We'll examine some of the most compelling evidence, delve into the potential implications of these encounters, and ask what the future holds for our understanding of this extraordinary phenomenon. Stay with us.
Welcome back to our deep dive. Before the break, we were talking about this potential paradigm shift, this idea that we might be on the verge of finally acknowledging that we are not alone in the universe. That's a pretty big thought, and it has some pretty profound implications.
It does. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What if all those years of science fiction, all those stories about alien encounters were closer to the truth than we ever imagined?
So let's jump back into those incredible Pentagon videos that we touched on earlier. I mean, those were, for me at least, a real game changer. These weren't just some blurry photos or shaky home videos. You're talking recordings that were taken with advanced military technology. And these objects that they captured on film, they were doing things that just seemed to defy the laws of physics as we know them.
Absolutely. And the fact that the Pentagon came out and officially acknowledged that those videos were authentic, I think that really lends a whole new level of credibility to this whole UFO phenomenon. This is no longer just a fringe topic that's relegated to, conspiracy theorists. This is something that even the highest levels of government are now taking seriously.
In one of the videos, a pilot can actually be heard saying, "Look at that thing, dude. It's rotating."
Yeah.
And the object is moving at incredible speeds, making these sudden changes in direction that would be impossible for any aircraft that we know of.
Yeah. And what I find so fascinating is that the pilots themselves were just baffled by what they were seeing. These are highly trained professionals. They are accustomed to identifying objects in the sky, and they were completely stumped.
It just underscores the point that we're dealing with something here that is truly unknown. It really makes you wonder what other videos or data might be out there, locked away, in some government archive, just waiting to be uncovered.
Yeah. That 2017 New York Times article that exposed the Pentagon's secret UFO program, it really blew the lid off this whole thing and opened the floodgates for more information to come to light. And I think since then, we've seen a steady trickle of these formerly classified documents, leaked videos, even admissions from former government officials who are now starting to come forward and share their experiences.
It feels like the tide is turning, doesn't it? Like the stigma that has surrounded UFOs for so long is slowly starting to dissipate, and more people are willing to at least acknowledge the possibility that we might not be alone.
I think you're right. And I think social media has played a role in that as well. People are now able to connect with others who've had similar experiences, share information, build a community around this topic. It's not something that you have to just whisper about in hushed tones anymore.
One of the things that I find so compelling about this whole topic is that it just touches on so many different aspects of our lives.
Right.
It's not just about science and technology. It's about our history, our culture, our understanding of our place in the cosmos.
I agree. It challenges our assumptions about what is possible, and it forces us to confront the unknown. And that can be both exciting and terrifying at the same time.
We've come a long way in this deep dive. We've explored cases with credible witnesses, military pilots, astronauts who have reported these encounters. We've delved into the evidence, from physical traces left behind to those incredible Pentagon videos that we talked about. And we've examined the role of government suppression. We've asked why this topic has been shrouded in so much secrecy for so long.
And I think the main takeaway here is that the reality of UFOs is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. We're not talking about little green men or flying saucers necessarily, but I think we are talking about the very real possibility that we are not alone in this universe.
It's a pretty profound thought to leave our listeners with. It's a thought that opens up a whole universe of possibilities, and it really does challenge us to expand our understanding of what it means to be human in this vast and mysterious cosmos that we live in.
So the next time you look up at the night sky, just remember that there might be more up there than meets the eye. Just keep an open mind. Never stop questioning.
That is great advice. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. And to our listeners, remember, the truth is out there waiting to be discovered.